Black Politics Today, an eye for what's at stake in global politics and your source for the social, economic, and political impact of public policy on the African American community. Your host, Kelly Michael Williams, is a political strategy veteran with an undefeated campaign record and the political experience that spans nearly 3 decades, from Mayor Willie Brown in California to President Barack Obama in our nation's capital. So get ready for a fresh and honest approach on the politics that affect you and your family the most. Now, your host, Kelly Michael Williams.
John Lewis sparked the nation in 1954 when he and hundreds of Americans sought to reclaim their constitutional rights, their civil rights, their inalienable rights, their rights to vote as they crossed the Edmund Bridge. That bridge, named after the man dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, was something that they needed to fight for, be active for, and be renowned for. That march across the bridge was a moment in time that forever changed America and culminated in the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1965. On May 25th of this year, in the middle of the day, much like John Lewis, many of America watched as another beating took place, resulting in the death of George Floyd. Much like John Lewis, it was caught on camera. And much like John Lewis, it changed the nation. It impacted the nation. It impacted the world. And it, in and of itself, caused many people to understand and see exactly why Black lives are so seriously and why Black lives matter. Tonight, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to welcome you to the Black Politics Today, and It's About Us town hall meeting right here on Black Politics Today. Some of you are listening to us live on Blog Talk Radio, and some of you are watching us on Facebook as well as YouTube. So for those of you who are watching us on Facebook and YouTube, if you have any questions or comments, you can certainly put them in there. As well as if you have any, if you want to call in, you can give us a call at 516-590-0143. That's 516-590-0143. And we'll be toggling back and forth between the two so that we can make sure that we can get everyone questions and help you out. If you have any questions or comments that you want to make, we'll make sure that we have that with you. We'll have that and we'll get that for you. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And certainly as we get ready and get started, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. I thought it was appropriate to start out with John Lewis and to have him give us some insight and information and allow us to see exactly what his life was all about. I mean, of course, we know what his life was about. He was a congressman. He was a civil rights leader. He, marched with Dr. King and others. But more importantly, he lived a life that was exemplary of exactly what the struggle is and what we've been talking about and why we're here tonight. And so tonight, as we look at that struggle in life in Black America after 250 years, after emancipation, after the civil rights movement, after African-American was elected president, we're still fighting for voting rights. We're still fighting for equal rights, human rights, income equality, housing equality. We're still fighting for the same things that we were fighting for 250 years ago. And quite honestly, it's like, why do we still have to fight for that? Why are we still at a moment in 2020, looking at stuff that we were fighting for 250 years ago? And the reason is because the systemic racism that we have to deal with, the structural racism that we have to deal with, the suppression that we have to deal with in every form, not just voter suppression, but in every form. That's what we have to deal with. It's like right there that we have to go through. It's all over the place. And this is why we're here tonight. So tonight, we're going to be addressing those struggles, the fight, and those advancements, because we have made progress, but progress isn't always there. Progress isn't always visible. It's not always in the moment that we can see it. So we're going to talk about that. And my panelists tonight, which I'm so excited to have, they're no stranger to the spotlight and they're no stranger to the topics we're going to be discussing tonight. So they're going to give us all that we need. They're going to help us go deeper into the chapters of police brutality, voter suppression, the 2020 census, and the structural and systemic racism that we've been fighting for the last 250 years. Joining me tonight from Los Angeles is law professor and former NASA engineer and manager. She's the publisher of LA Progressive, and that is Sharon Kyle, right? Dr. Wilmer Leon will be joining us as well. He is a former political science adjunct professor from Howard University, and he is the host of Inside the Issues with Wilmer Leon on XM Radio. Also joining us is Dr. Judy Lubin. She is the president of CURE, the Center for Urban and Racial Equality. She's president and founder of CURE. Then we have Representative Jason Fields from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He is also the principal of the Black Wealth Network, and he's in his final year of service there for the Milwaukee State House. And we want to thank him for joining us as well. Then we'll have joining us later on tonight is New York retired detective, NYPD detective, Mark Claxton. He's the director of public and political affairs for the Black Law Enforcement Alliance and a life member of the NAACP. And then anchoring our show tonight is Dr. Janine Abrams McClain. She is the vice president of Fair Count, the nonprofit organization that many of you know about. She co-founded with her sister, Stacey Abrams, there in Georgia to make sure that not only the census count, but your vote counts. So as we get started, I want to thank each and every one of you, Jason, Sharon, everybody, for joining us tonight and allowing yourselves and to, find yourself on this, allowing yourselves to be a part of the show, to be a part of the program, and just, taking time out to join us tonight. I want to thank you. I want to thank my staff, of course, for allowing us and helping us put this all together. So people, those of you watching in, joining in, if you want to give us a call at 516-590-0143, that's the number to call, 516-590-0143 if you have any questions or comments, or you can go to our Facebook page at blackpoliticstoday.com and our YouTube page at blackpoliticstoday.com and give us any questions or comments there, and we'll take those on. So you guys are looking good. You're looking good. You're looking good. So as I was starting to say, I was looking at all of this here, and I see that we have the whole process of looking at systemic racism. I think I was going to start with Mark, but let me start with you, Judy, because as we look at this and we talk about what brought us here, what started, how do we get here, the whole structural racism that this country has been dealing with has been codified in our Constitution, in our local and state laws. And that's the way it's been for centuries. And when I think about it, I think about what John Lewis was marching for, what he was marching against and willing to lose his life for. And then we think about the system of injustice and everything that we've had to deal with as Black folks and what we had to overcome. And lo and behold, last week, I think it was last week, we got Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, it does an interview with, I believe it's The Guardian, and he talks about slavery was a necessary evil for the foundation of this country. And I think he says it as like, let me see here. We have to study the history of slavery and its role and impact on the development of our country, because otherwise we can't understand our country, as the founding fathers said. Now, many of you guys know our founding fathers didn't say nothing like that. Okay, nowhere in there did they say anything like that. His behind said that. But then to fall back and to come back from there, he then says he's going to introduce a bill that it's called Saving American History Act of 2020. Saving American History Act of 2020. And therefore, he's not going to supply any federal funds to public schools if they decide to teach the 1619 Project. Are you serious? I mean, let's think about that. You're not going to fund the 1619. I mean, you're not going to fund public schools because you don't want the 1619 Project taught in public schools. So we can't teach history from a Black perspective, but certainly we can keep it from a white perspective. Judy, come on now. Because this is the same type of racism and things that John Lewis was dealing with when he was trying to get a library card. You're doing all this and going through this. Why is it okay for white folks to say it's okay for us to keep the white version of our history, but we cannot integrate, a Black perspective in there, or doing things so that Black folks can understand exactly what our history was and is?
Mm-hmm. Michael, thank you so much for having me. I knew you were going to try and have us bring it this evening. You just started off with someone that doesn't know where to start, right? But we are resting on a powerful legacy. John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and so many others that have laid the path for where we are today, right? And that we are in a moment of reckoning, right? We have been at this place a number of different times in this nation's history, particularly post-emancipation, where there was an opportunity for this country to decide that it was going to start over and build institutions based on equity and justice. And instead, we got Black codes, we got Jim Crow, and we got structural racism that we are trying to undo today. And so that's why we're here. And so we have to keep our eyes on the prize. There's always going to be resistance. And so when you hear, there's also going to be resistance and legitimation of the dehumanization of Black lives, right? And so what you just shared here with Senator Cotton, right? That we should expect, unfortunately, more of that, right? But we are determined, we are focused. We know what we're trying to build, right? That this country needs to be fundamentally transformed. Every institution, we saw not just with COVID-19, but police violence, right? That racism doesn't stop, even in a pandemic where we're asked to stay home. That racism doesn't stop, that racist police violence doesn't stop. And so we have to stay focused. We have to get into every institution and transform each institution and undo racism, because we've had enough. We've had enough. And so the work that I'm trying to do now is focus on the vision, on what we're trying to create. We know there's always going to be resistance. And so we need to be prepared for that, but we also need to be focused on what we're trying to do.
Janine, let me come to you now and talk about, I mean, there's so many people out there that talks about, they're saying that they're well, in my opinion, they're the racist or they're ignorant. Okay. And that's on white and Black folks, Candace Owens. So they sit there and they say the systemic racism doesn't exist, Candace Owens. And they say that we just need to get over it and just keep on moving. How do we get over a system of operation that is ingrained in the policies and the laws of our system? How do we get over that?
I don't think we have to. We don't get over it. But we can change. We don't have to get over it. That the onus for that should not be on us. I talk to people all the time. I grew up in South Mississippi. I talk to people now in Tucker, Georgia, that come up with excuses for why, Confederate flags are their history and why, we can remember this, but just forget about, 400 years of enslavement. And I think, there are certain people that try to make themselves feel better, but they put the onus on us to let it go. And we just have to know and be strong in our response that it's not, we don't have to, and we need to make sure that our children know, it's all about protecting history. We need to let our children know that this is our history. And when you think about, I'm 38, And I have friends that are my age that think that civil rights was, the civil rights movement was, 100 years ago. But my parents were a part of that. My grandparents were a part of that. I knew my great-grandmother, who was a sharecropper, who worked in fields until her toenails fell off. I knew her. She died when I was 16. And so I think that history that we have to take it and not let it, weigh us down, but to remember where we come from and then to move forward. And one of the ways that we can do that is to be engaged in our society and basically in our society now. We have an opportunity this year to do so much. I was talking to someone the other day and said, 2020 is the year that keeps on giving. And it ain't giving, it's not giving sugar. It's giving a whole lot of stuff. And you can look at everything that's happening this year and really think that it's awful. And a lot of bad things are happening, but we also have opportunities to make this a pivotal year in our history. We have the opportunity to make sure that we are seen when we participate in the census, and we have the opportunity to make sure that we are heard loud and clear when we go to the polls.
And Sharon, that's what we have to do. We have to make sure that we are seen, that we are heard, that we're moving forward, and we're going to the polls, because that is a key principle of what's happened. But the systemic nature of us even trying to get there is an issue that we have to overcome. But like Janine says, we don't have to, but we have to be, I guess, effective in dealing with it the way it is. So how do we put ourselves, or are we able to change these systems by just putting Black folks in charge?
No, as much, that sounds like that would be a very easy solution, but actually we really don't want to simply have Black faces in high places. We've got to move beyond that. And in order to dismantle the institutional racism that is so pervasive, that it's been so baked into the fabric of what the United States is. Even before the United States was a country, when we were still in the colonial state, we were baking in these racist policies, starting as early as in the mid-1600s with the anti-miscegenation laws that first were put on the books, where we, for the very first time, began to define race, began to define the white race as being entitled to certain privileges that non-whites were not entitled to. So no, it's going to take more than putting Black and brown faces in high places. We need to do something similar to what was done 40 years ago. We talk about 40 years ago, how we've seen a dismantling of the voter rights protections that we had won during the civil rights movement. Well, there was a change 40 years ago. There was an actual intentional desire, started out with a memo called the Powell Memo. There was Justice Lewis Powell, who wrote a memo to the United States Chamber of Commerce. And he laid out a plan, and that plan has been followed to a T. The plan really focuses on education as well as communication, scooping up the media. So you know that now over the past 40 years, the media is now controlled by a small cadre of very deep-pocketed corporations,
right,
who really control what we see and hear. So we've got to fight in order to get kind of information that any democratic society would need in order to be informed voters. Being a voter is extremely important, but more important than just being a voter, you've got to be an informed voter. And the way that our media is controlled these days, it takes work. It's not impossible, but it's hard to get the information that you need. We need an engaged populace that is educated, both in our educational systems and very astute about the media that they consume. Corporate media has not been our friend, and it has never been our friend. If you look back to the days of Ida B. Wells, when she was a journalist at the age of 25, and initially she believed that these lynchings that were occurring during her generation, she believed that, well, the Black men and women who were being lynched had perhaps done something that maybe they deserve to be lynched. And then she began to look into it and found, oh no, that was not the case at all. But mainstream media at the time said, well, you know, while lynching is ugly, so is raping. And so, you know, they endorsed the story, the narrative. They wrote the narrative, they controlled the narrative, and something similar to that is happening today. It took so long for us to get attention. What happened with the unfortunate, tragic story of George Floyd that has mounted this worldwide protest marches. It's not the first time. We all know.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I have a dad.
Been around forever.
Been around forever.
All right.
But
Mark, let me come to you now, because what Sharon just said and what she touched on is that idea where you're looking at a whole bunch that's going on in terms of the oldest structures of systemic racism that we've dealt with, and that's in the form of policing. And that is that area where we know today's structure of policing is rooted in those slave patrols that we used to hear about, or we know about anyway, and how policing started and where it began and what it's doing. So when we think about that and we look at those efforts, are the personal experiences that we've all had here on the panel and people that we know about here on the panel that have dealt with that system, because I think that's the oldest system in the book. How or what will reallocating funds do? Because in my opinion, the reallocating of funds and this idea of taking money away from the police department isn't how we get to police brutality. I think the way we get to police brutality and this whole structure is through attitudes and through the policies and the systems on the street. So when you think about that, how do you think, or what is it, in your opinion, as a former police officer and in the system and then being part of NAACP, how do you think that should work? How should reallocating the funds actually operate, and will that be enough for us to deal with?
The answer to will it be enough is no, but I think that a lot of people believe that the reallocation or redistribution of the funds will result in some removal of some power and authority from police department, police agencies, and trickle down to individual police officers. That is not necessarily the case. I don't believe that to be necessarily the case. I think the defunding movement, the defunding of the police movement, some people talk about dismantling police, is all legitimate cries and demands for the application of law and justice to be applied equitably across the board. And I think a lot of times, I think my camera's off here. Okay, here I am. Too often, for too long, there have been people, individual entities that have totally disregarded the wills and the needs of large swaths of communities, in particular Black and brown communities. So I think the whole movement right now is about how do you gain control of an entity and institution that has been part and parcel to the oppression of Black and brown people. And for some, it's about defunding. For some, it's about reallocation of resources. For some, it's about dismantling. For some, it's about farming out everything that police do or historically have done professionally to other entities, to other agencies, to keep police strictly, more or less, for physical and property security. And that's it. And the hope is, I believe that there are individuals who believe and hope that will in some way offer some relief to Black and brown communities. I don't believe that to be the case. Mm-hmm. I think that the institution itself and knowing the history is very important. And understanding the history, you recognize that the policing and law enforcement in general is not dysfunctional. It is not out of sorts. It's not imbalanced. It's working the way in which it was designed to work. So in essence, what you have to do is restructure the entire institution itself, the objectives, the goals, but you have to do so with a clear understanding about the history of policing. That, as you mentioned, being slave patrols,
right.
And that ties in also to the Tom Cotton discussion. I think the importance about us hearing what Tom Cotton and other, neo-Confederates believe is vitally important, because sometimes it forces us to examine the history of these entities, institutions, individuals, and come up with some new ideas and solutions.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something where we need to realize and recognize that. I mean, for Tom Cotton to literally come out and say that he wants to defund the K through 12 education system because they want to teach the 1619 Project because he thinks that is propaganda, or he doesn't agree with what they said and how they said it, is so I'm not going to say what I want to say, because I mean, this man, his family owned slaves.
There you go.
His family owned slaves, and now you're going to tell America that you're going to basically take money away from K through 12 education, because that's federal money, because K through 12 is funded by the federal government, but you're going to take away that money because you don't want the 1619 Project taught, because you don't like what it says. But you don't mind that. But then here come to you and say, but you can't reallocate money for the police department because we don't want that. But yet Black and brown people are the ones that dying at the police department, you know, at the hands of, I mean, somebody help me out here, because I really want to say, Jason, come on here. I really want to say what I want to say, but you know, I always get some pushback. So I'm trying to be nice and calm. I told them I wasn't going to cuss tonight. And I told him I wasn't going to cuss nobody out tonight, Candace Owens. But you know what? I just really need to, like, somebody to address that for me, because that's ridiculous. How are you going to? Go ahead, Sharon.
Can I jump in here?
Jason, you took too long.
So I mean, I think. So I think we do have an example of this. If we look, I think it's 1954,
right.
The Little Rock Nine in Arkansas. Those schools were closed after the entire community said, well, if our kids have to go to school with Black kids, we'll just close the school. And they did.
Yeah.
So they're willing to do that. We have an example of, and more than one example in our history.
Yeah. Yeah. Jason, go ahead.
You know what? I think Attorney Sharon is right. I mean, here's the bigger issue, right? Like, what happens since you know that's the card he plays? You know that's what he's doing. Here's the bigger question for us. What are we going to do about that?
Right.
And so, you know, rather us spending our time with him, we know where he's at. What we need to be doing as a community, as a people, saying, listen, calling our elected officials on the federal level, saying, look, we're not feeling him. We not on that. If you are not saying something, or if you are not being vehemently opposed to the stuff that's coming out his mouth, then why do we have you in office, right? Because we have to get to a point where, and I think it was brought up earlier, where we get out of this just having Black folks represent us because they Black. Because everybody who Black ain't necessarily with us.
Right.
You know, we got to admit, some of us be trifling too. And so if that's the question, then we need to start strategically looking at, if we got people like this at the federal level, because ain't none of us vote for him, right? I mean, ain't none of us vote for him. So then that means the people we putting in office need to be speaking up, saying, you know what? No, we got to check this right here at the door, because that's utterly stupid what you just said.
Right.
And then, and as Attorney Sharon said, to what degree are we going to be tired of being sick and tired and actually do something? That's where I need us as Black people to be. We can't keep saying we tired. We hear people like that in power, but then we don't do anything about it. We just argue and we get complacent until the next idiot says something stupid, and then we talking about it. So I'm with you, but the question is, what are we going to do with the people we have in office to combat that kind of mentality?
And I think that's where we need to look at it, and how we need to move forward, because those individuals that are in office, they need to check him, and we need to make sure they check him. And then we need to, if they don't check him, then we need to check them. So if they don't check him, we need to check them and make sure we get out of that. I want to move forward too, because I want to take that whole idea of the structural and systemic racism that we're dealing with and move to the police brutality, because that's ultimately one of the places where we see it most impacted in our community, in our lives, as we move down the whole ideas of the topics that we're going to discuss tonight. Because this dude right here, Derek Chauvin, he was not worried about whether or not the police department was going to get or receive funding. So defunding the police department wasn't on his mind at this point in time. He didn't really care. His knee on George Floyd's neck was about power and attitude. And that's why I said earlier, I think police brutality and systemic racism is always about an attitude of the people and the policies. Because if you sit here and you watch him, the whole time he was there for that 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he was sitting there doing what he wanted to do because he had done it before. He felt empowered to do it. And he said, you can't do anything about it. Let me show you what I can do. And there ain't a damn thing you can do about it, because for me, that's the root of police brutality right there. That attitude, this dude, the way he's looking at George Floyd right now, the way he's looking at him and how he's got his hand in his pocket or on his hip and sitting there saying, yeah, I can't breathe. You can't breathe? So what? I don't care that you can breathe. It doesn't matter. Go ahead with the video. It doesn't matter that you can't breathe, right? I don't care, right? And that is the problem that I have and the problem we see. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
My God. It's another sad day in America.
Painful to be introduced to George Floyd during his last breath with a cop's knee on his neck. On his neck. He deserves so much more. So much more.
How many black lives have to be taken before something is done?
We are not a threat.
I am shaking as I type. This has got to stop.
We are sick of it.
Conviction.
I just want us all to live.
That will not stop until the powers that be are finally held accountable.
Don't look away from the truth until every one of us are free from white supremacy.
The world stands with you.
Criminalizing and killing of black and brown bodies is not new. It's as old as America. It's just getting filmed more.
Do you know what it feels like to be hunted? To have a new hashtag for a dead black person every single day? How does one plan a life if they aren't sure they will have a life to plan? Trayvon
Armstrong, Deborah Dance,
Megan Flanagan,
Michelle Lee Sharp,
Megan,
George Floyd. His name was George Floyd. Say his name.
Say his name. George Floyd. Say his name.
Say their names.
Once again, and always, we fight for justice.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Rest in power, beautiful.
Jason.
Yeah.
That was one of those things that when I saw that, I said I had to play that because I wanted to look at it. One of the things that it surprised me, although I knew about it, but it was the idea or the reminder, not the idea, but the reminder of so many women who have died. And we have not necessarily given them the same just that we've given the brothers that we have. And I think it's something that I wanted to make sure I highlighted when I saw that, because in that clip alone, we saw more women than we saw men. And it was powerful to me because I'll be honest, I don't know all the women's names. And it's something that I'm sure that many of us don't know all the women's names because they didn't get as much attention because they may not have been shot. They were strangled, or they were choked, or they were put in a compromising position where they had bags put over their face, spit bags put over their face, and then they went into cardiac arrest and other things of that nature. So they didn't get the attention that they deserved behind that. But being an elected official and you know, city councils, mayors, and state legislatures, one of the things that I know that governments do and when they struggle with policing is that they pass these laws because they're afraid of being soft on crime. And Democrats struggle with that for years. They were, especially at the presidential level, they would get caught up in being called out for being soft on crime and not being able to like put everything out until Clinton came around and he said, I'm gonna be tough on crime. I'm gonna put 100,000 cops on the street. I'm gonna make sure that we're out there. And so conservative Democrats and independents said, I'm gonna go with him and I'm gonna give him a chance. And then he put 100,000 people on the street. And then it was that continuation of the war on drugs. And then we had the mass arrests and mass incarceration and things of that nature, because those targets were Black and brown communities. They didn't send, them to the other communities. So how do we make sure that the policy shift and the attitude shift comes about to stop police from killing Black folks?
I think it's a good question. There's a few things we need to consider. Number one, you are talking about, I think when you look at Black women and how they treated, this is just one incident, right? I mean, we can look at healthcare, venture capital, where Black women are not getting the credit or the attention that they deserve. That being said, moving from a policy perspective, there are a few things we need to do. And here's where having Black folks with high intellectual capital at the table doing policy. Because what happens is we get caught up in the rhetoric stuff. We get caught up, and I think your officer, Mark, I think it was, said the whole defund the police. Look, it sounds good, right? But there's some things that we need to consider. Number one, what are the policy initiatives that are being done, and are they logistically realistic? So when we talk about these policies, number one, you need to have folks that are from these communities at the table crafting these policies. One of the initiatives that we're trying to do is, when you look at that officer, and Kelly, you mentioned it, what you said was, he's done this before with no fear of anything happening to him.
Right.
And so one of the things that I've talked to with our governor, legislation about, I have a friend who was murdered by a police officer, sheriff here in Wisconsin recently, last year. And one of the things that I said was, listen, we have people, horrific officers. Not all officers are bad, so let's move away from that. But we do have bad apples here. In a profession where, let's be realistic, you cannot have bad apples, right? You cannot have bad apples in certain professions. It's like Chris Rock said, imagine an airplane pilot or pilot company saying, hey, we got some good pilots, but we got a few bad apples that like to crash in the mountains. So we cannot have bad apples who are police officers. That being said, these are individuals who have perpetuated certain incidences before. Why don't we know what's in their disciplinary record?
Right.
Why is it that until these things happen, then we find out after it's all said and done that this person should have been fired a long time ago?
Right.
And so there are things that we need to look at to address some of this. And let me say this I don't ever recall it being policy or proper procedure for officers need to be on the person's neck. So then that becomes a question of enforcement. Mm-hmm. That leads to, if you're not enforcing the manuals or the proper procedures, then why aren't we? Because if you're not enforcing them, then people feel that they can get away with this stuff because they have.
They have.
And finally, when we look at that, you know me, I'm a money, power, influence kind of guy. We need to have legitimate laws on the books that says, if you are found guilty of one of these incidences, no, you don't get off the hook by just saying $50,000 to the victim. Police officers need to maybe chime in and get a liability insurance clause or policy. And the victims of these perpetuated crimes need to be rewarded monetarily more. This, I believe, when you start looking at those kinds of policies, then we start addressing racist police officers, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about racist, not in all cases, but we're talking about racist police officers who've gotten away with this stuff time and time again, and nobody said anything.
Absolutely. And Judy, that's the idea that I think and feel when I talk about policy, because I think a lot of things that we're addressing and a lot of things that we need to comes from a policy perspective and a structural perspective or systemic perspective and what's happening, because cops are in essence enforcing what they have been told to do by mayors and city councils. And what Mark said and what Jason said is that they're enforcing the policies and laws. Because if you think about it, the mayors and the state legislature are saying, go out there and fight the war on drugs. And they send you out there and they tell you to fight the war on drugs, but they don't send you to the white community. They send you to the Black community. But that's like, white people do drugs too. In fact, like I think I can't remember who it was said it. We don't have planes shipping it in here. We don't own no planes to bring it in here. So it's coming in, it's coming to our neighborhood, but we're not the ones who are actually able to like bring it in and bring it. So you have the territorial and the boundary wars for the gangs in our cities. And then you have the mayors and everybody saying, go out there and police our streets. And the war is our streets. And then the police are charged to enforce that. So they're enforcing the policies to get rid of the people out there. But like I said, they're sending the people to the Black community. So in one part of it, I think it's a territorial war because the policy says fight the war on crime. The mayors and the people in charge says go to the Black community. And that's their policy. They don't tell them to go to the white community. So aren't we dealing with policies that we need to take down, strip down, get rid of, and elect people or put people in office to change those policies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're dealing with policies and a mindset, right? And you said it right in terms of like you even heard it over the past few weeks during the course of the protest that many of these police officers were describing even, you know, people who are engaging in peaceful protests as, you know, they're going into a war. And they're seeing our communities as combatants, right? And they're the soldiers going in. And so what is the impact of practice when you assume that you are going into war with people that you're supposed to be policing? So that's the attitude that they're bringing into our communities. And so you wonder why we get the outcomes that we get. And so I think, you know, in this particular wave of the Black Lives Matter movement, right, that folks are really talking about the policies, you know, the lack of the, you know, in some jurisdictions, the lack of limits on use of force. We know that when there are more restrictive policies in terms of use of force, that the number of police killings actually goes down. But the whole defund the police movement, right, is asking us to really like reconsider the whole practice of policing, right? And this idea that the way that you reduce crime is to just increase police force, a police force, and spend more money on policing when there's so many things that are wrong in our communities that are not being invested in. Housing, healthcare, jobs. People can't get paid a livable wage, right? The basic things that people need to survive and that honor our humanity are being underfunded, right? And so in contrast to just continued increases in policing. So something is completely off balance, right? And that's the conversation that we need to have, is that what is it that we actually need to be investing in, that we need to be funding, that we need to be supporting, that we need to be nurturing, so our communities truly are safe, so that our communities are really healthy, right? And so that's what we're battling, not just on a local level, but nationally in the politics of like a Senator Cotton, right? That even in this moment right now, where we're still waiting for another bill, right? The evictions moratorium is about to run out. The $600 unemployment add-on is gone, right? And folks, you know, people need these things just to survive. You know, in a couple of days, people aren't going to know how they're going to be able to pay their rent, or if they're going to be evicted. And, you know, people are, you know, they're playing politics with our lives. And so, you know, those are the types of policies that we need to be lifting up. When you don't provide the basic level of care and provide for the basic needs that people have, you're going to have crime. So we really need to be thinking about what are the things that really keep us safe and that make us healthy.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Judy. And Janine, I want to talk to you because when I thought about this, and I thought about it from a territorial perspective, and I thought about it and in terms of how we go to war. So we go to war and we're fighting over territory. So when we go fight over in Afghanistan or things of that nature, we're fighting for that territory. And that's what's going on here in our city sometimes when we're talking about the quote unquote war on drugs. But then something hit me as I was contemplating that, is that while the police are coming into our neighborhoods to quote unquote fight this war against us, once they calm down, or once crime levels go down to an acceptable level, then we have our Caucasian brothers and sisters move in. And then now all of a sudden, our communities are okay. And then our property values start rising. And then the banks start coming in, the developers start coming in, the stores start coming in. And I looked at it from the standpoint, I said, here's another system. Here's another structure. Here's something else that has literally, I mean, I kid you not. And this afternoon, as I was preparing and thinking about it, I said, I'll be damned. It just hit me. It was like, look at this. It's territorial. Another system structure, territory, Candace Owens, where they're coming in and saying, okay, let's go ahead and fight crime, beat crime, and tear everything down, because if we can keep them suppressed and we keep property values down because of the crime rate, then if we then move, now, why is it property values go up? Because Caucasians move in. I don't have nothing with Caucasians. They can come and live with us and come to our community, but I have a real problem that my property value only is valued because they live next door to me. If they're not living next door to me, then my property value somehow is not valuable because my brother's living next to me. Nah, that's not right. I mean, that's not the way it should be. And so I looked at it from that standpoint and I said, okay, so isn't police brutality and this whole system that we face, systems of territory, no different than what the federal government does all the time? And isn't that whole gentrification that comes into play about a policy and structure that now we're fighting against and didn't even know we're fighting against it?
I think that's a great analogy. And, you know, everything that you just described is definitely true. You know, we all have, you see it in cities, you see it in smaller cities like I live in, and, you know, in Georgia, where you do see this gentrification and really pushing out people of color. And, you know, it is systemic. And part of the way that we can fight it is through, and I'm going to talk about the census just because there's a whole bunch going on.
Yeah, because that's coming up next anyway. That's coming up next. Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead, talk about it.
But I'll say this about gentrification and why it is such an issue with regard to, you know, to everything that you said, but also with the census, is because in the past, the Census Bureau, when Black people don't respond or didn't respond to the census because of certain reasons, because there weren't resources put into our communities, when you talk about where the commercials being played to tell you about where this, you know, why the census is so important or why voting is so important, where are the, you know, the people coming around to your doors? Folks don't knock on everybody's door to, you know, to tell them about something that's really important in their communities. You don't go to every door. So when you look at those communities that don't get that information, what ends up happening when they start to gentrify, when you start having other people move into Black communities, and we'll say if there are white people moving into these Black communities, then what ends up happening is that the white people who are historically overcounted, so they get their fair share plus someone else's, right? They move into these communities and they count themselves. But then the minority of Black people or brown people that are left in that area, if they don't respond because they don't know about it or they don't trust the government or whatever reason, then what the Census Bureau does is they try to guess who's there. And part of that guessing is a statistical thing called imputation, where they will literally say that if you haven't responded and you are surrounded by white people, then we will assume or impute that your household is a home of white people, a home of a white family. And so in that way, we not only lose our communities in reality, you know, we're losing out on Black people that are able to own these homes, but we also lose it in the numbers. And then that goes back to what Judy was talking about, where you have these communities, our communities, we can't get the resources we need. We don't have adequate health care because we don't have the numbers that we need. If there's a federal program that focuses on minorities. If we're not counted, then we miss the cutoff to receive those funds. When our schools are overcrowded, we can't do anything about it because we aren't counted. When you talk about health disparities, and part of that reason is because you can't go to a grocery store because you live in a food desert, but if you go to the neighborhood that you used to live in that you got kicked out of it, all of a sudden you have 2 grocery stores on both sides of town. All of that has to do with our representation. And so we not only have to worry, focus on the tangible part of it, making sure that we are still there and that we are in these neighborhoods and try our best and do our best to help people not be kicked out during the process of gentrification. But we also have to have the data behind it. We have to have the numbers, and you don't get the numbers unless you participate in the census.
Absolutely, and that's something that certainly we're about to get to next, because
everything we talk about, that
piece right there, that is the piece that I wait to get to. But I want to come to you, Mark, on this with the idea of this police brutality and this idea of territory and taking over, because when I saw this video and I was looking at it and this whole thing, I mean, it just got me, because I see this right here where he kicks this dude, and this is the old video. In fact, Jason, this is in I mean, not Jason. This is actually in St. Paul, Minnesota, right? Minneapolis, because I was thinking about it. I saw this, and one of the things when I was a cop, Mark, I don't remember the unions negotiating their contracts the way they do now, right? You see this? I don't remember the unions negotiating their contracts where they can't be arrested, they can't go to jail, nothing can happen to them, right? And they just basically work with impunity. They pulling his hair, they kicking him, they beating his brothers behind. And so when you think about these contracts, and I want to talk to you about it as a former NYPD, how did you guys negotiate these contracts with these cities that says you can beat somebody's behind, you can kick them, and not have any repercussions?
There's power in numbers, and I think what happened is a lot of the larger police agencies like the NYPD took those numbers and that power and began to extend that into negotiation. So where typically you had unions negotiate salary and health benefits, because some unions became so powerful, they then begin to spread their tentacles into other areas. And that's how you end up with things such as qualified immunity, which provides so much cover for misconduct by police and illegality by police, and protects them from civil liability in regards to any actions that they take part in. I think a key part here is that there is a what really is damaging to police departments, police agencies, policing in general, is the toxic police culture. The toxic police culture subsumes every other thing around it. And toxic police culture can beat back good, solid, well-intended legislation. And we've seen that play out time and time again. So until you deal with, address, or come up with ways to really kind of take the toxicity out of police culture, you're just spinning your wheels, because there are brilliant legislative ideas, there are brilliant reform ideas, but until they attack directly police culture and begin to shift that, there is not much that will change. And that's why part of the reform movement is really about not necessarily defunding or disbanding, etc., but responsible people say, let's reimagine policing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's re-examine it. Let's implement new ideas and new initiatives in it. Let's refocus it. Let's make it more community friendly. Theoretically, it's never been, but I mean that's old theory. So it's more about a reimagination, and that reimagination requires a real frank and honest discussion about toxic police culture and how that dominates everything else that you can put up against it.
Jason, I mean, when you got the cities, the police unions holding the cities hostage in fear because they are afraid of, the police union is going to balk at them, or they're going to stop them from being able to protect the city and things like that. Aren't they just continuing and furthering the same structural systemic racism and empowering the police themselves, because they're just continuing that systemic cycle? Because the police are saying, well, if you don't give us what we want and let us do it the way we want to do it, a la slave patrol, then we're not going to protect the city. We're not going to do anything. So cities, in some essence, are being held hostage because of these policies.
No, that you're absolutely right. I mean, when we look at, for just a case in example or case in point, when you look at the city of Milwaukee, where I represent a portion of, when the city budget is 40 to 50% spent on the Milwaukee Police Department, that power that they have to say to potential leaders or whoever who's afraid, right, of that power, because this is what we're talking about, people who are afraid to make a decision and say, listen, we understand that, but at the same point in time, we can't just allow this status quo to continue, because it's not helping. And I think what you would find is, if you have more leaders who stood up and said, listen, if a person is going to leave because we won't allow them to continue racist policies, then to hell with them. Bye. Bye. And I think when you have that kind of attitude from a leader or from leaders, you'll begin to attract a different kind of mentality. But like you said before, what happens is the police unions, these unions, they've gotten to a point where the strength and the strategies that they involve, they've been successful. Case in point, here in the state of Wisconsin, a lot of things that the Milwaukee Police Department union can get away with or do, they can take it to the state legislature, where you have that mentality of tough on crime. There's a consistent majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate. So now the people who are voting on these things, they don't live in the city of Milwaukee. Right. So they can do whatever they can do exactly whatever they want to support that group, that organization, get contributions, and roll right with them. And so if we don't, you have to look at that dynamic, because those are some of the things that keeps the status quo and that system, that systemic racism policy or that mindset in place. So we need leaders who will say, you know what, that's not cool. And if we have to start from the ground floor, then that's what we got to do, because you can't have it both ways. And as Dr. Judy said before, and I agree, a lot of this discussion has to be, what are we doing with the money, or what will we do? Are we going to start attacking problems from the beginning, the solution, or are we going to be continuing to fall into that rhetoric? Because that's what led us here in the first place. Tough on crime. So more money got spent on the police department. Mental health suffered. Programs that could benefit people in the community suffered. And that led us to this catch-22 we in, where now we almost forced to choose of what a good person would do, And so if we don't start to look and say to those organizations, that police union, look, that can't fly anymore. We that's not sustainable. But as long as they still have those out-of-state politicians who don't live in majority urban areas, but will do whatever they ask, it's going to be an obstacle that we have to continue to address.
Sharon, and looking at the continued protests around the country and other places, it seems like the movement has been hijacked in some cases. At least it looks that way. It looks like what started out as Black Lives Matter and put forth, it looks like white lives have hijacked that, because a lot of the violence comes after Black Lives Matter leaves, goes home for the curfew, and then everybody's out there 1, 2 in the morning setting fire to federal buildings. Now, why are we standing in front of the federal building, the federal courthouse, allowing the chime to go on? I don't know. But has Black Lives Matter lost control of this movement? And if so, how do they regain it And as Jason said, how do we make sure that we move those people who are outside of the area and keep the people inside?
So I think that we have to be careful to not conflate certain groups with other groups. There are white allies who are serious about changing the system. And I think as Black people, those of us who belong to the Black Lives Matter movement, who are engaged with the movement for Black lives, we need to seize on this opportunity to make the most of it, because I think we all know that the current situation is not sustainable. We are not going to be having global protests forever.
Right.
So we need to take advantage of whatever we can take advantage of. But the truth of the matter is, when we talk about changing policy, like getting rid of the qualified immunity doctrine that protects police officers, pretty much they can do whatever they want, and they don't have to be concerned about losing their pension or paying any kind of personal costs. We can look at changing those kinds of policies, but when it comes down to it, no amount of legislating, litigating, or lobbying will replace a serious time of truth and reconciliation and an acknowledgement of what has happened to Black, brown, the indigenous people of this country for hundreds of years. Until we really get down to that, I think that what will happen is we'll continue to see the morphing, which is what we've had. You know, somebody said, and it could have been Ta-Nehisi Coates, that the past isn't over. It isn't even the past.
Right.
And so what we keep addressing things from a legislative, not to say that we shouldn't. We do need to address legislation, and we do need to litigate, and we do need to lobby. But we got to get down to the core, and that requires truth and reconciliation.
So, Mark, let's follow with that, because, putting on and thinking about it from the NAACP standpoint and what she's saying, because I agree that we have to stay focused, stay vigilant, and move forward. And so the question is, in the sense of, it appears at times that the Black Lives Matter movement is movement segmented by state and not collectively focused in one direction. And I want you to address that or talk about that. So if that is the case, and I don't know that it is, but if that's the case, is that because there is no central leadership like the civil rights movement was in '65, where you had a central leadership and you had a national platform and a national goal, as opposed to the segments of what's going on from state to state to state? And is there a need for a central leadership? And does that weaken the message because they don't have it?
Well, that's a mouthful, but I'll say this. The confusion and the challenge that many people have with what is called Black Lives Matter is, what component of Black Lives Matter are you talking about? Are you talking about the informal organization that has some structure? Are you talking about the not-for-profit organization that's kind of connected, maybe connected to the informal organization? Are you talking about just the acronym itself? Are you talking about the initials themselves? Are you talking about just the feeling of the importance of recognizing or acknowledging the significance of Black life? You see, the challenge is, and in many ways it's brilliant for the organization itself, but the challenge for other people who are clearly outside of the organization but support the idea that Black lives have importance and Black lives matter. The significance of that is, for the organization, is that it means so many different things to so many different people. And the looseness of the organization gives it a certain autonomy and also a certain mystery. So you don't know if somebody pops up in one jurisdiction claiming to be Black Lives Matter, are they with the for-profit, not-for-profit, informal, local? You don't know. There's a benefit to that, but there's also a drawback, because your message can never be very clear and concise. You can't necessarily have the best organizational skills, Many people will say you may not need the best organizational skills for a movement based on certain principles, but realistically, it's always going to be a challenge. One thing is for certain, and I think most people agree with this: black or white people in the movement itself who support any form of Black Lives Matter, it's important and significant to take action based on your principles and your values and to hold governments and entities and institutions accountable for it. When you do that, however, you have to recognize that there are other people who are going to jump into your movement to try to cause confusion, to try to take you off course, to perhaps serve as anarchists, because there are anarchist movements who've infiltrated Black Lives Matter and other organizations that are quote unquote peaceful. That's the risk you take. But you do so with the ultimate goals and objectives in mind, and you push towards those goals and objectives, even when there are others who may have infiltrated you, who may be trying to undercut you and undercut your movement. You have to be forceful enough and clear-eyed enough to push towards certain goals. Even when you come up with ideas like total defunding or disbanding the police, you have to be in a position to be able to defend those things.
I want to give you opportunity to give us a call at 516-590-0143. That's 516-590-0143. Or certainly you can hit us up on Facebook at blackpoliticstoday.com, and I believe YouTube as well, blackpoliticstoday.com, if you have any questions or comment. But give us a call at 516-590-0143. I think I want to thank you guys out there on Facebook. I see you, Sheriff Burkhead, out of North Carolina, the first Black elected sheriff in that city's or county's 140-year history. Absolutely. I want to thank you, sir, for jumping up and helping us out and joining us, because certainly I'm going to have you on the broadcast and bring you back out here again so you can talk about all the things you're doing down there in Durham, North Carolina, as the first elected African-American, 8 Black sheriffs elected in 2018. First time that's ever happened in those counties in that state. So I certainly want to thank them and appreciate him joining us and being a part of the discussion. 516-590-0143. 516-590-0143. Arsene, what's going on, man? One of our writers for blackpoliticstoday.com, Arsene Frederick. Certainly you can see his articles in our latest issue, the previous issue, our May and June issue of Black Politics Today magazine at blackpoliticstoday.com. I want to go to the census now and take a look, because one of the things for me is that we need to make sure that we put people in place. And I know we talked about this earlier, and we talked about not just electing Black folks to be in leadership and having them there. And I agree with that, but I also agree that we need to have some Black folks in leadership, especially in places where we have not been before and where we need to be. But then we also just have to hold them accountable. The same way we hold other folks accountable, we got to hold our people accountable. And a lot of times we don't like to, as our people, especially if it's the first time they're there, we don't want to go in and beat them up. We want to give them a chance, because we let the white folks or anybody else stay there forever, and we never beat them up or take them out. So I think we need to make sure that we put people in place that hold our best interests, because when we think about the next 10 years, we need to make sure that we have people in place that have our best interests, because over the next 10 years, we got to control our political power. Our political power over this next 10 years is going to be critical. And if we do not take a hold of this movement and this moment, Black America, we can no longer sit around and think about or think that somebody else is going to have our best interests at hand, or somebody else is going to do it for us because they're part of this party or that party, or because they, hang with us or do this. No, we have to do it ourselves. We have to decide that in 2020, as I said, and I've called this the Black Reset, we have to decide that we're going to do it. That whatever is going to happen, however we're going to do it, we have to do it ourselves, which means that every member of your household, your sister's household, your brother's household, Big Mama's household, everybody that you know that's Black or brown, that looks like you, talks like you, hangs with you, eats dinner with you, your good cooking, your bad cooking, whatever it is, they better register, sign up, and complete the census. Because 2020 census, if we don't do that, 10 years of our political power, our economic power, and our social impact is going to impact our community devastatingly, and we're not going to know what's going to happen. Play it.
It's about the next 10 years. But this is something you can do today. You can make a difference today.
By completing the 2020 census. The census impacts hospitals, schools,
public transportation, and most importantly, our representation in government.
Gives us an opportunity to be heard. It's easy.
It's only 10 questions.
So do your part.
Go to 2020census.gov and complete the census today.
What are you waiting for?
In your article, in this current issue of Black Politics Today magazine, and the current issue that we have, you talk about prison gerrymandering, and you talk about the census, prison gerrymandering, and you highlight the flaws of the system's enumerating process and the individuals in prison and how that in itself defies what the state constitutions and the statute says are supposed to be, where we're counted. So talk to us about your article. Give us some understanding of what prison gerrymandering is. And then Janine, I'm gonna let you through it. I'm gonna let you go, girl. Okay, I'm gonna let you go. Sharon, go ahead and talk to us about that.
Okay, so prison gerrymandering is a phenomenon that has taken on a significant importance because of the size of our prison system. Everybody knows the United States imprisons more people than like the next 10 largest country combined. And over the past 40 years, our prison population has grown 800%. So we know that for the most part, Black and brown people are disproportionately represented in our prison system. And generally what's happened is these people are arrested for crimes that occur generally in the urban centers. And I'm speaking in broad generalizations here, but they're arrested for crimes that occur in urban centers, but they are actually put in prisons that are in rural communities. Now, the vast majority of states in the United States, when they conduct the census, they are counting the prisoners as if they reside in the prison. So Los Angeles, for example, or Chicago or New York, they stand to lose, no longer Los Angeles and actually New York, but Chicago stands to lose a considerable number of people being counted rightfully in the cities that they come from, because they're going to be counted in these rural areas. And so what does that mean? What that means is looking at the 2020 census, and I'm looking at my article here because I want to make sure that I don't make a mistake when I quote these numbers, because they just are staggering.
Sharon, it's yes. Okay. Make a mistake. That means they have to buy the magazine and they can read it there. Don't worry about that. Okay, so the 2020 census will be used to help direct $1.5 trillion with a T, $trillion per year in federal funding for programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, the National School Lunch Program, and several others. The data is also used to help officials to determine the individual and organizational eligibility of these programs. So when they count the incarcerated people as residents of towns where they are confined, as opposed to towns that they'll be returned to when they leave prison, where they're confined, they stand to benefit. That town stands to benefit by their head count. Right. And some people, including Michelle Alexander, liken this to the modern day version of the 3/5 clause in the Constitution. You remember when the founding fathers decided the Southerners wanted the slaves to be counted, and the Northerners did not want the slaves to be counted because that would determine the congressional representation that each state got. So the compromise was a 3/5 compromise. Slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person. They couldn't vote, but they got counted. And so that's the same thing that's happening here. These people who are incarcerated
for the most part, can't vote. I think in Vermont they can, but they are counted, and those dollars will be directed in many cases to communities that don't need it. So
Janine, I'm gonna let you go, girl. You can take it over because we talked about this at the Urban League when we had our panel. This again, another system structure of keeping us out and putting us off and doing those kind of things. Another system and structure that we have. Now we're counted, but we don't count. We don't count what we need to count. We only count what they want us to count. And again, we're now property again, and they're benefiting from us again, and they're using us again, but we're not getting the benefits from the dollars again. So we're in the white rural communities. We're not in the city. We're not where we need to be. And it's out there. As Sharon talked about, $1.5 trillion. And if we don't respond to this, and now we got COVID, and COVID's impacting this, how do we make sure we get this money because of the systemic nature that we have to deal with, Candace Owens? How do we make sure we get our money?
You kill
it. I'm coming after her. I'm coming after her. You guys haven't seen it yet, but I'm coming after her behind. Okay.
Now, I just want to preface it by saying that I am not a one-trick pony, all right? That I can only talk about the census. The reason I talk about it is because it literally touches every single thing in our lives. Almost all of the issues that we've been discussing tonight can be impacted, not necessarily fixed. There's no magic pill, but they can be impacted and made better by our participation in the census. When she's talking about prison gerrymandering, I think there's only like 6 states that have changed the rules so that at least the political power will be shifted back to the communities where these prisoners are from. But those rural white communities still get the money. They get those federal dollars because that's a part of the way that the system is set up here. But it is, and it's under attack. I'll tell you right now, tomorrow we'll be the Congressional Black Caucus is having an emergency town hall called Black America Counts because the census is under attack. We know that right now, or as the latest data, if you compare predominantly white areas or census tracts to predominantly Black census tracts, we know that Black census tracts are falling almost 15% behind those of predominantly white census tracts. And if that weren't bad enough, when you look at areas in the country that are impacted by COVID-19, right? So we know that that Black and brown people are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. And when you look at the South, where I'm in Georgia, you look at Florida, you see these numbers going up. And these are also the places where you see a lot of the low census response rates. Mm-hmm. So in addition to the pandemic, you already have these, or you have these low response rates because we are historically undercounted because of a whole myriad of reasons. Then you add on to it the actual viral pandemic. Then you add on to it this other systemic disease that we've been dealing with for the entire history of America, racism, and what I think it's an uprising, these protests. But this is something else that people are dealing with. And we are, we're heavy. There's a lot on us, but they're taking that they're using that to their advantage. The Trump administration released this memo last week that is trying to discount undocumented immigrants from the reapportionment process. We know today, we heard that, or not today, but we found out last week that the Census Bureau is decreasing the door knocking phase. So the part of the census where they go door to door that is instrumental in getting populations of people of color counted, they want to decrease it by a whole month during a pandemic. And it would be the shortest door knocking phase that we have ever had. And so I think that we have to pay attention to what's going on around us. They want us to be distracted by everything else. But this is something that we have one chance every decade to do. And if we lose this opportunity, then we're stuck for another 10 years to be twiddling our thumbs and trying to figure out why everything is going wrong.
Jason, that is critical, man. I mean, and you guys having a battle up there in Wisconsin. because when you and Judy and I, we had our conversation back, I think in March or May, before the pandemic really hit. You were at your first election, your first primary you guys were having out there. And I was talking about the foolishness of your not the governor, but the state legislature and your speaker wrapped up in a whole medical garb, talking about, oh, it's okay to safe to come out and vote. It's okay to safe to come out. I wanted to pimp slap his behind. But I mean, it's just crazy. You got $1.5 trillion out there, and we don't have the HBCUs. We don't have the churches. We don't have our normal areas where we can collectively go out there and hit this. So what's going to be our alternative to make sure that we don't miss out? Because Sharon and Janine hit it. It's critical. We're talking about 10 years. We don't get a do-over. We can't come back next year and fix it. It has to be done this year. And here we go again, Candace Owens, systemic. The system of what they're doing from the post office to everything else, they're trying to dismantle it all and keep us where we are.
No, I agree with you. And I wanted to pose that question to Dr. McLean, because I think, Kelly, you and I and Judy, we talked about this. One of the things that happens is we see these, we're in these situations, and far be it for me to act like I know everything, you know. But my question, Dr. McLean, is what should or could all African-American elected officials across the country be doing to make sure we are hitting on this? And I'll preface that with this. We still have a few people where, let's be candid. I'm going to be candid. I'll vote name, you know, why should I be vote? Give me what's the game plan to get those people to go, hey, look, you need to get on board because this is crucial.
So one, we have an entire elected officials toolkit ready for you. And any elected official that needs help, we hired somebody specifically to work with elected officials. When you talk about folks that don't vote, right, that are afraid of putting their information out there because they worry that the government's going to know where they are. One, they already know where you are. They sent you the letter.
Exactly. Thank you. I just want to get out of that.
but it is. It's that, you know, hey, are you there? You know, calling your name and you raise your hand and say you're here, you don't get the funds. But, you know, I think we have to be, you know, it comes down to those trusted voices, right? And maybe the trusted voice isn't the elected official. Maybe that trusted voice is the pastor that was there with you when your mama got sick of COVID and you were in the hospital, right? And she was praying for your mother while she was getting out of the hospital. Maybe that's a trusted voice that you can that can give that message. That's why we talk to elected officials, but we also talk to folks that are just in your community. If you could get one person to be able to, you know, convince one other person, then they send a text message or tell a story or something like that. It's going to take people talking to each other. And I know what you mean. I have friends and I have family that don't participate in anything civically related to civic engagement, but I've been able to flip some of them by really bringing it home, by letting them know they don't have to be afraid if somebody's living with them who has a warrant. All right. If they have a warrant, put them on there anyway, because I heard that they will not hire police officers specifically because they don't want anybody to be tempted to, you know, turn somebody in. But it's also your information is safe and protected and hidden for 72 years. If you're dry snitching on somebody, they won't know for 72 years. If you get federal benefits, tell them, like, they're not going to be impacted if the numbers don't match. But it's about having those real conversations. And you sound, you know, Representative Fields, you sound like a politician that people will listen to. And so if you have that voice, then you need to be the one out there saying these things to people. You send the emails, you send the text messages, you send the flyers, you tell them why it's important and keep it real with them. Because if we don't, we're not going to get counted and we're going to be left out again for another decade.
That is absolutely true, Judy, because we talked about it, and the COVID issue is huge. COVID is keeping Black folks back. We're dying from it. We have a huge rate of it. Everything is critical behind this. And like Judy said, it's that whole thing of we don't want to talk to the government. We don't want to tell them nothing. We don't want to say nothing. but we really have to be able to get into our churches, get into our communities, get to our fraternities, our sororities, these HBCUs, do something, because if they're going to cut back the door knocking for a month, and you're out in the rural areas, and even in the inner city, but you don't have access to the internet and things like that. And if they cut back the door knocking, that's another segment of missed people that we're going to have. And here in Washington, D.C., they did not in 2010 count Ward 7 and Ward 8, which is the predominantly Black neighborhoods. They didn't even count them. They estimated them in 2010. So clearly, you know, and I'm in Ward 8 now, we've lost a whole lot of money. So I'm trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again, but that's what we're going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Sharon, let me go to you while we get Judy fixed.
Okay, sure. So one of the things that we didn't mention is that the monies, when you talk about the ward that you live in, the infrastructure monies comes as a result of the census. Now, we already know that the current administration has issued an executive order to try to not count undocumented immigrants. Well, according to the Constitution of the United States, the purpose of a census is to count every living human being that is inside of our borders. Doesn't matter if they have citizenship papers or not. That's unimportant, because the purpose of the census is to try to determine how to equitably allocate resources. Right. And so we need bridges and roads, and everybody's using them. Doesn't matter if you're documented or you're not. The ACLU of New York has filed a lawsuit, one of its many, against this administration, and they just did this on July the 24th in response to the executive order that Trump issued, and we just kind of have to wait and see how that's going to turn out.
So let me come back to you, Janine, and talk about what ultimately do we have to do, and how ultimately can we overcome this? And as you answer that question, Detective Claxton, Mark asked the question about college students. And you answered this question about where they're going to be counted at. All right, I see that. But go ahead and answer that question. What do we do now, given what we already know and COVID and how we deal with things? What does everyone need to do, given the alternative of what we have?
The short answer is you need to complete the census. So we talk about stuff, you know, we talk about money and healthcare and infrastructure and schools and all of this. Another thing that people need to understand is that the census will be critical for our recovery from this pandemic. So before this, I was a researcher at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So I have a little bit of experience in public health. I know that the census directs money for disaster recovery. And so as we are recovering from this pandemic, we're not even to the second wave yet. We're still in the first wave. We just didn't do it right the first time. But we'll be recovering from this well into 2021. And if we don't have the numbers for our rural communities, here in Georgia, we had a hospital shut down just last week in rural Georgia in the middle of a pandemic. So when we don't have the money for our, the money for our hospitals, the money for businesses to recover, the money for our schools to recover, we won't get that if we don't complete the census. And so I say to everybody that's listening here that all you need to do is go to my2020census.gov and get counted today. It's 10 questions. I promise you I can find more about you on the internet doing a Google search than the information that you're going to put on the census. And so if if you have any questions, you can go to faircount.com and ask us. You can email me directly. I'll answer any question anybody has. But we are in a dire situation here. Dire. That
absolutely.
If we don't step up, we can't complain after this.
No.
And so I just need everybody to take the census and join us tomorrow night when we have our town hall, because we have some other action items that y'all be able to do.
Well, certainly. Give us that information real quick. What's the information for tomorrow night at your town hall?
It is Congressional Black Caucus, the Black America Counts Town Hall.
Okay. All right. So the impact of the census is going to be critical, and that's what we're looking for and what we need, to make sure that we're out there, because if we don't, like I said, it's going to be a 10-year battle. It's going to be a 10-year battle, and we need to know exactly what's going on, because voter suppression is real. If we don't participate, we got 10 years to mess up. And think about that. 10 years from now is 2030, just a few years short of when we're supposed to be the majority. Black and brown folks are supposed to be the majority. Now, I was just looking at some numbers the other day. If we don't play our cards right, we're already at, I think it was what, $14,000 net wealth. Our net worth is $14,000. Latinos, I think ours is 11,000. Latinos is 14,000, and whites is 110,000. So you see this gap. And if we don't participate in this census, if we don't participate in voting and getting people in office that have policies and change them, we're going to get stuck. And voter suppression is real. There's a whole idea about it. I think we're ready with that. Brian, go ahead. I'm gonna keep talking until you get it. Because if we decide that, like we did in 2016, we're going to sit on our behind because we're going to say we don't like her or we don't like him, or we're going to do the, what is it called? The something of evil. Yeah, that ain't going to work. All right. Play it.
Voter suppression. Well, the U.S. Legal Code actually gives us a framework to work with. Title 18, Section 594, if you want to look it up for yourself. It says that voter suppression is any effort, either legal or illegal, by way of laws, administrative rules, or tactics that prevent eligible voters from registering to vote or voting. Today, this can happen in a few key ways. Common examples are voter ID laws, closing polling places in certain neighborhoods, reducing poll hours, or purging voter registrations. There can be reasonable arguments made for some of these practices, but they've been shown to disproportionately impact communities of color and the elderly. That's why the Voting Rights Act of 1965 banned them in most cases. But in 2013, the United States Supreme Court heard the case of Shelby County versus Holder, and in its decision, it rolled back most of the protections which targeted southern states. It was a close decision, 5-4. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that the law was based on decades-old data and eradicated practices, and that there was no longer such a disparity for communities of color. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented. She said it was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. Since that Supreme Court decision, 25 states, many in the South, have put in place new voter restrictions, like ID requirements and cutbacks in early voting. So the result of all this? We're less than 5 months away from the November election, and there are still a lot of questions about how our votes will be counted. So one of the top questions is how many people are going to be able to vote by mail this November. Some states have voted only by mail for years. President Trump has been claiming this will lead to massive voter fraud, but the evidence from vote by mail states says otherwise.
So Mark, this whole thing, put on your civil rights hat for me, because the idea that the Supreme Court is going to say that, oh, we don't need the Voting Rights Act any longer. We don't need Title V, Section 5. We don't need this because, you know what? Black people voted overwhelmingly in 2008, and they beat out white people voting in 2012. We don't need this any longer. How stupid and ridiculous is that? I like what Ginsburg said. It's like saying, you got, take my umbrella and I'm in the middle of a storm. This whole idea of voter suppression, from everything that we're dealing with right now, is critical. Look, the post office, the states, Georgia, Brian Kemp, DeSantis, all these dudes, and how they're moving things around and how they're stopping things. How are we going to move past? And I know it's kind of a crazy question, but how do we then fight the suppression that we're going to experience, so that we can make sure that not only our vote is counted, but we can break past these other barriers that we have to deal with? Mark Claxton.
Well, one is you have to really recognize the reality of what we're facing right now, and you have to pay attention to the dynamic of politics as it's occurring currently. And I think you have to devise strategies to, if not increase turnout, at least ensure that you're having, a maximum turnout. Look, we have to just expect the worst and expect every trick to be played, and really commit ourselves to full participation, overwhelming participation.
Absolutely. Sharon, let me come back to you as well on this, because when I think
all
about
issues surrounding or presented by this president about mail-in ballots and how ineffective they are, or prone to be corrupted, etc. And people are saying, oh, we don't have to worry about that because he can't do anything about it. Congress can only do something about it. Well, I don't trust Congress. And I think we have to keep our eyes on the prize and really turn out, above and beyond what anyone's expectations are, and to incorporate and encourage those people who are new or opposed to the system, the same manner in which, the young lady spoke about the census and encouraging her family members to participate. Right. I think it's time for us to increase our education, but most importantly, to increase our participation in the process.
Exactly. Sharon, I was going to say to you, because I look back to 1981 when the Voting Rights Act was going to be ratified. And what happened was that in Mississippi, they required you to register twice. No, 3 times. They required you to register twice for 3 elections. So you had to drive 50 miles to the county seat and register for the county and state election. Then you had to turn around and come back home to your regular hometown and register for the city election. Nowhere in America have I ever heard of you having to register twice for 3 different elections. And now they just changed the game. So now we have to bring an ID. They close the polling place, they move the polling place, or they purge the voter roll. These things, and looking at it from the standpoint of what the Secretaries of State's doing, like in Louisville, Kentucky, Georgia, it's absolutely crazy. And really it should be illegal, but there's not. So how are we going to deal with, and why hasn't someone sued to make it illegal?
So actually, again, the ACLU does have several lawsuits attacking these issues. But, like I've said before, we can't lobby, litigate, and legislate our way out of the problem that we have in the United States. It will continue to morph until we get down to the real issue. I don't know how Justice Roberts could say that we're beyond racism in this country. I mean, the protections that the Voting Rights Act provided to us immediately after that act was gutted, the next day, there were states that put laws on the books that oppressed voters. So, yeah, it's not impossible. We're at a time, it's a perfect time to make change, but we really need to go deep.
We do, Judy. We have to go real deep. And it has to be something where we completely take, my thing is we got to take over the system. And I said it earlier, we have to take over the system. We have to put people in place that have and hold our best interests. And in some cases, all cases, that needs to be us. And it can't be us that are sellouts. They can't be us that want to do something different. But as Brian says right there, why is Congress not doing more to stop voter suppression? What more can Congress do, Judy? I mean, they're trying to do something, but what more can they do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're running against the same opposition, right? That there have been attempts. I think there's a bill right now, right, to update the Voting Rights Act and to, address some of the issues with the Shelby decision. But there's a concerted opposition that understands the power of the Black vote, that understands the power of brown folks, indigenous folks voting. And so they have no shame in trying to deny us of our right to
None
vote.
Whatsoever.
Right. We just lost John Lewis, right, who was fighting for the right to vote decades ago. We're still fighting for the right to vote right now. Right. And this is our right that's being denied to us. And they're openly, you know, talking about their strategies to try to prevent us from voting, right? We know that the voter ID legislations that were passed all across the country were targeted particularly towards Black voters, to prevent us from having access to the ballot. And so I think it's what Mark said, right? That one, we're probably not going to get any legislation before the November election. And so we just have to turn out in overwhelming numbers so that there's no question what the results are of the election, right? That
there can't be, right?
There can't be a question about it. We already know, right? It's particularly with the occupant in the White House who's trying to come up with reasons now to push the election date back, right? That we don't know that he's going to leave, you know, come January. So if there is what we don't want is a contested election,
right?
Because they control the levers of power, right? That would eventually decide who wins.
Exactly. Especially if you got a Supreme Court that's going to do that just like that. Janine, let me go to you quickly and talk and ask, like Sharon said, the ACLU is all over the place filing lawsuits and doing things. I look at the 15th Amendment because you got the 15th, the 19th, and the 26th Amendment all talking about voting, and all of them, you know, identify either, you know, race, sex, color of skin, and other things. But I think the 15th Amendment is one where the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So I look at that and I say, can't, or why, and Sharon, I may come back to you for this too. Where are our legal scholars saying imprisonment is that condition of servitude that we are no longer under any longer to fight for, and use that as the 15th Amendment as the rationale to make sure that those who were in prison can get their voting rights back? Is there a way for us to do that?
I am not a constitutional, I'm a scholar or lawyer, but Sharon, yeah.
Go ahead, answer.
I'll pass on what I can.
All right, go ahead, Sharon.
Right, so no, I'm not a constitutional scholar either, but I am on the board for the ACLU. And I do know that the ACLU was instrumental in helping to change some of that in the state of Florida, but then it was overturned. So these are constant battles. So what can people do? People that are really concerned about that, don't leave it to the scholars, don't leave it to the constitutional scholars. Volunteer your time, give money to organizations that you know are looking out for our best interest. And that's one of the things that I find that saddens me more than anything else. There is a weathering effect, and you guys know about this weathering term where they talk about, you know, with this constant drip. We are impacted by this. It makes us tired. It makes us weary.
Right.
But we got to keep moving, and we have to keep supporting organizations that support us. Because that's the only way this is going to happen. We cannot lose the fact that we have agency. We do have power, and the more we use it, the more power we have.
So,
can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
I agree with everything she just said. And also, we have to think, you know, we're talking a lot about the Constitution and about Congress, but a lot of it comes down to the states and the rules that the states can put into place. And so if you were, you know, if people are in states like Georgia that have rampant, you know, that was evident in my sister's election, rampant voter suppression, you know, it's time that you can make changes at the state level. And one way to do that, if you feel powerless, is to make changes in the people who represent you. And the way you do that is to get out there and vote. And so I think that if there, you know, as we fight some of these things, we have to also think about what we can do in our own backyards before we run to Congress.
So speaking of your sister, VP Stakes is going on. And so I want to put it out to all the panelists, actually. Who is your choice and why? We got a few minutes left, and I want to know, because I want to comment and see where you guys are going. So I'm not going to start with you, Janine. I'm going to let you. I'm not going to start with you.
Look, so, y'all already know what my answer is, so I'm just going to be quiet.
Right. So, Mark, let me ask you, You've been quiet too long, bro. You've been quiet too long. I want to come to you. Who's your choice, and why? And what do you see out there?
Well, I think all of the individuals who've been publicly connected to this VP race at this point are all really, uber qualified. There's no question about that. And my own personal choice is, and excuse my little dog walking around in the background.
That's all right.
My own personal choice is that Susan Rice, for experience reasons, for qualification reasons. But I think the other individuals who are mentioned, especially the other Black women, and I think it has to be a Black woman in my mind. And if it isn't, there's going to be a backlash. So if it's not going to be a Black woman, they need to announce right away so that we can begin this process of trying to bring people back to the party, because there's going to be some significant backlash if there is not a Black woman. But I think the point has been made by other people, and I agree that there are other positions that would be very important, vitally important, perhaps Supreme Court, Attorney General position, that the other individuals would be suited for as well. So just instinctively, my gut tells me, as far as for me, is Susan Rice, but the others are just really overqualified for the position, to be honest with you. I mean, and when I think of vice presidents, I'm showing my age here, but I just think about Dan Quayle, and I go, you got to be kidding me. So
right, exactly. Potato, right?
Right. So if you ask my qualification, but they are, and I love Stacey Abrams.
Tell me about it, Judy. Who's your choice, and why?
The one thing that we know is that there is no lack of qualified Black women to serve as vice president and president of the United States. So I just know Biden needs to choose a Black woman. The time is now. We are the most dependable base of voters for the Democratic Party, and so we are waiting, for a Black woman to be announced. I mean, all of them are qualified. Kamala, Val Dennings.
So which one do you want?
Karen, Susan.
Which one you want, Judy?
I'm happy with anyone that he.
Come on, Judy. Don't leave me.
Come on, Judy. Which one you want? Who's your first instinct?
I don't know. I think, for different reasons, right?
Give me top three. Give me top three.
Susan Rice because she has administration experience. I also think Val Dennings, who's from my home state of Florida, is a really interesting choice and could be a strategic choice because Florida is so important.
All right, Jason, who you got?
You know what? So my first pick is Stacey Abrams, and then not because I'm on with her sister, but I think when you look at, a couple of reasons. Number one, you got this split in the Democratic Party, right? And so you got people like myself who are blue dog Democrats. Then you got the Bernie Sanders people. But then you look at somebody who can pull everybody together. There is no doubt in my mind that she's probably out of that list, probably number one. And then I would look at maybe Val Dennings, because in today's environment, the background, where she's at, what she brings to the table. If it's me, I'm telling him, if it's not Stacey Abrams, then you go with Val.
And well, like everybody said, we're blessed with sort of an embarrassment of riches here. There are two women from California, Karen Bass and Kamala Harris. But me being a progressive and the editor and publisher of the LA Progressive, I am it's very important to me that whoever becomes vice president is as progressive as can be, because let's face it, Vice President Joe Biden is 75? So
76, something like that.
Okay, so even worse.
Yeah.
There's a pretty good chance that whoever is his VP will become the president.
Right.
And so for that reason, it's very important to me that the person not only have professional experience, but a lot of life experience.
Okay. All right.
So that's all I will say.
All right. You named two. I'm gonna give you. All right, Janine. Who's your choice?
Come on now.
She named two. She named two. I'm gonna give her. She named two. I'm gonna give her a break. I'm looking at my time. Actually, I'm looking at my time. All right, Janine. Who's your choice? You want?
It's just so hard to pick. Of course, I would ride with my sister. Like, duh. that's a no-brainer. Not just because she's my sister, but I think she's I think she's 100% qualified. And, I spent a lot of time with her on her, and I am saying this, I work for a 501c3. I am taking off my 501c3 hat and saying, in my personal opinion, as Audrey Janine Abrams McClain, that, I think you do need somebody that can, really bring folks together. And I've seen her do it in South Georgia. And so I feel like if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. So, but now I have that on, and let's talk about nonpartisan things.
All right. I'm gonna correct it, because one thing I love about your sister is I call her the communicator in chief, as they used to, I think they called Clinton that at one time. But when she's asked questions and when she talks, she breaks it down to the least common denominator so everyone can understand it. And I think, like Jason said, she's a galvanizing force where she can pull everybody together. She pulls the blacks together, the whites, the young and the old, and everybody. And like she did in Georgia. So I'm behind her 100%. I think Susan Rice would be good in the sense because of the administrative experience. And I like Val Demings, and I like Kamala too, but I'm looking at the point of where Val is in Florida, and that being a state that we really need. And so then I'm looking at Stacey in Georgia, but also that galvanizing force. So real quick, everybody, 30 seconds. What's at stake for us? What's at stake for Black America? Mark, hit me off. Start off with us.
Really, our survival and our movement for the next several generations. This is the most critical time and point of my life, and I think for Black folk in the past couple of centuries. This is the most significant time for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Judy, what's at stake?
Everything's at stake, right? Particularly in the age of COVID, our health is at stake. Our access to the ballot is at stake. So we have to be counted. We have to make sure that we get our friends, our families out to vote or sign, mail in your vote, your ballots. So everything's at stake, right? And I think, to echo Mark's point, right, we are in such an important moment of transition and hope, right? If we can seize the moment, right? And so we can really turn this country around. So that's what's at stake, right? That our future generations can actually experience a whole different country if we seize the moment.
Absolutely. Sharon, what's at stake?
Sadly, our very lives are at stake. I mean, when you consider what's happening with COVID and we do not have a national response, we have got to seize this moment, because when white America gets a cold, we get pneumonia, our very lives are at stake.
Janine, what's at stake?
I have to say our recovery, our power, our future, and our ability to thrive and not just survive is at stake. And that's why we have to get counted and we have to vote. And then when they start drawing those lines, we have to make sure that we're at the table when they start trying to dice and slice our communities up.
Jason, what's at stake?
I think what's at stake is if we don't get this or do this right, Black folks can expect to move 3 steps backwards in 5 categories. Number 1, economic development. Number 2, criminal justice reform. Number 3, education. Number 4, access to health care. And number 5, civic engagement. If Donald Trump gets in, he gets another Supreme Court justice appointment. If something happens to our Ruth Bader, and we take 3 steps backwards,
that would be a 6-3 margin. And right now, Democrats could have a 6-3 margin had Hillary gotten elected and we did something in the Senate. I want to thank you guys. I want to appreciate you. I also want to let everyone know, if you see the backdrop behind me, certainly in our the next few town halls we're going to do, we're going to be looking for you if you want to be behind us and show your sponsorship and let us know and talk to you out. Shout out to Covenant House, Homeless Nation, Bonner Dental Network, Insperity, Rockabye Media, let us know. Certainly we'll put our information out there. Give us a call or send us an email at info@blackpoliticstoday.com. info@blackpoliticstoday.com. We also have our water bottles here. Let me get that up there. Water bottles on our website. We got these water bottles on our website, Black Politics Today. So certainly get out there. We have big tote bags. All right. So we want to make sure that we talk about share everything up. We got the mouse pad. We got that out there too. So certainly go to our website, blackpoliticstoday.com. Click on the store and get anything you want to have out there. With t-shirts, hats, caps, and all that good stuff. We want to do that. I want to thank my guests tonight, Sharon Kyle, Jason Fields, Judy Lubin, Janine McLean, Abrams McLean, Mark Claxton. All right. I want to thank each of you. They're going to be back again for our for one of our other town halls. I'm not going to tell you now because I need you to go to blackpoliticstoday.com. I need you to get online. I need you to become a member so that you can register, so you can get that information, because it's about us in 2020. There is no mistake about it. Every one of them already talked about it. It's about us. We have to do it. We're the only ones that can do it. We have to make sure our best interest is held in our hands and not someone else's hands, but in our hands. We can do it with your help. It has to be something done this year. You have to do the census. You have to be out there. You have to vote. Black America, there's so much to make sure, and there's so much at stake. Make sure that you get everyone in your household registered to vote. I don't care if you register. I don't care if you voted last week. They will try to purge you. Make sure you re-register to vote, and you can go to, I think it's vote.com, and make sure you can find out across the state, across the country, wherever you are, make sure you re-register to vote. I don't care if you did it yesterday. Go back in 3 weeks, do it again, because they may purge you. Make sure you do that. And make sure you show up early in November. Do not wait for election day. Repeat it. Do not wait for election day. Show up early. Vote early. I would say vote often, but that's illegal. But vote early. All right? And get out there and understand that Trump, Barr, McConnell, they are going to run this country in the ground if they get another 4 years. We've already seen what they've done. So you don't have to ask yourself what they're going to do. You don't have to pretend they're going to do something different. It's out there. We're going to do it, and it's going to happen. So I want to make sure you do out there, because like I said, this is about us, and it's time for the Black reset. So bring my guests up. I want to thank each and every one of you again. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Open up their mics and let's make sure that when we do this again, because we have the economic town hall, we got the education and health town hall, and then we got the political town hall. And each one of you guys are coming back again. So I'm excited. I want to thank you. This is our first town hall. This is the first one we did. And I am just excited that I had each and every one of you to kick it off, to start it off. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much. Janine, thank you. I want to get your sister on here next time too. Help us out. Sharon, thank you. Jason, appreciate you. Judy, love you. Mark, my brother from New York. I appreciate you guys all. Until next time, until next week, if it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.